You're probably well aware that Vancouver is a very expensive market. And what's most expensive in the city is land. And where do you get the most land? It's when you're buying a house. There's only 75,000 houses in the city of Vancouver. So we don't have a lot of owners of individual single family detached houses in the city. To be one of them, you have to be lucky, you have to be very successful, and you also have to know what you're doing. So if you're coming here from somewhere else, you're at a disadvantage. You don't know what everybody else potentially already knows. And this video is going to attempt to even that playing field so that you make sure that you know what you're doing, what you're going about, that you fully understand what you're investing in, and that you're making a choice that's right for you. There's other options, and those might be better options for you. But if a house is what you want, then you're going to want to watch this entire video. So before we get too far into this, I do want to talk a little bit about what can you expect when you're buying a house in Vancouver. And there's a few things. One is they're not very big. As with all the real estate in Vancouver, you're typically looking at a house that's around 2,000 square feet, and it's going to sit on a piece of land that's at roughly 4,000 square feet. Some pieces are slightly smaller, slightly bigger, but that's the standard city lot. When you get out into the suburbs in an area like Burnaby or Coquitlam, the lots might be 50% larger. The houses might be slightly bigger, but not generally, double, triple the size. That's really much further out, and you are going to be spending a premium for that kind of size. So you need to know that about the size. And when I'm also talking about, roughly 2,000 square feet in the city of Vancouver, and in the Lower Mainland in general, we do include the basement. And that's something that a lot of people from other parts of Canada aren't used to. I know in Calgary, as an example, when you get the measurement of a house, all they're counting is everything above the basement. But in Vancouver, where space is at a real premium, you're counting the basement. And so that, 2,200 square feet would typically be 1,100 square feet up and 1,100 square feet down. So you need to have those expectations when you're looking at buying a house in the city of Vancouver. Now let's talk about the pros and the cons. So let's start with why you should buy a house. What are the pros? Number one, I would say, is control. You don't have to worry about anybody else. Like with a strata, you're only one voice out of 20, out of 100, 200. With a house, it's just you. You get to decide your own fate. If your roof starts leaking, you decide whether you want to patch it or you want to replace it. If it snows outside, you can decide what contractor to hire to take the snow away, to shovel it, is what I'm trying to say, or whether you should shovel it yourself. So you're in complete control. The only person that you have to battle with is yourself. You're the ones who are making those decisions. You don't need to compromise with other owners. You don't need to overspend or underspend. It's completely within your control. Your own investment is yours. Number two is space. Space is at a premium in the city of Vancouver, as I've talked about in other videos, but really where you're going to get the most space is with a house. And a typical house is roughly around 2,200 square feet, and it could be a little bit less. It could be somewhere between 1,600 and roughly 3,000 square feet, but generally they're in the low 2,000 square feet range. And so, that's way more than you're going to find in the typical condominium, and even more than you're usually going to find in a townhouse. So if you need space, the place that you're going to find it is with a house. And number three is a yard. If you want outdoor space, as many of us do, really one of the only places you're going to find it is with a house. The condo might have a balcony, it might have a patio that's a little bit larger, but it's unlikely to have much green space. And a townhouse very often has very limited outdoor space, or a small yard of some kind at best. So really where you're going to find the most land is with a house. Number three is the income potential. And when you're spending a lot of money in Vancouver, often people need or want some kind of income from their property. If you own a condo, yeah, sure, if it's a 2-bedroom condo and it's just you or you and your spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend, sure, you could rent out the other room, but you're going to be in each other's faces. That is actually happening more and more these days, where people are renting out a room in an apartment. And occasionally with townhouses, people will have space that they can potentially rent out, or a half duplex. That's a little more likely. It's unusual in the city of Vancouver. But really the only way you can be certain that you have space that you can rent out that you might not need otherwise, that's going to be with a house. And Many people have basement suites in Vancouver. That's what we call them. Maybe a laneway house as well, or as an alternative. But most people in the city that have bought within, I'd say, the last 10, 20 years have some sort of revenue from their house. I myself have a suite in my house. So my family and I live in the upstairs, and then the basement is rented. And rents can be pretty substantial in Vancouver. So it makes a huge impact on your mortgage and makes owning a house in the city of Vancouver far more affordable. Bear with me one second. I am a real estate agent. I'm not YouTube influencer by any means. I'm a real estate agent that helps people move to the city of Vancouver. Over my 15-year career, I've helped hundreds of people do just that. And I can help you too. If you're thinking of moving here, be sure to reach out. My contact information is right there on the screen. Reach out anytime. We can get that ball rolling. Now let's get back to the video. Flexibility, that's another big advantage. So a condo, a one-bedroom condo is only ever going to be a one-bedroom condo. A 3-bedroom townhouse is only ever going to be a 3-bedroom townhouse. But you can buy, say, a 5-bedroom house and maybe turn it into a 6-bedroom with 2 basement suites, and then build a laneway house in the back. And you can have one suite that is maybe the space for guests when they come into town. That's a little bit smaller, and then a larger legal basement suite that you rent out for revenue, and then a laneway house in the backyard that can either be Airbnb'd or you rent long term, or it can also be a way of allowing family members to live with you. So when your kids get a little bit older, they don't have to leave the city. They can rent the laneway house from you, and they can have their own family live in that separate house, but still close to their parents. And so there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options when it comes to a house that just aren't available in other housing types in Vancouver. Perhaps what I would say is probably the biggest advantage is it's the way that most of us are looking at our homes these days, in Vancouver at least. It's an investment. And really the best investment, in my opinion, is land. The more land that you can buy in the city of Vancouver, the better you're going to do in the long term. They're not making any more of it. It's a very small city. There's an incredible demand. And where you get the most land, as I said earlier, is with a house. So in terms of long-term investments, I see the house as the best return on your investment. And finally, when you own a house, typically people don't sell them frequently. So people are buying into a house and staying in that neighborhood for a long period of time. So I think, if you want sort of a settled neighborhood where people know one another, there's not a high amount of turnover, then owning a house is sort of the way to go. A condominium building can often have really high turnover with a lot of tenants, and then just people that, tend to move more frequently. So people tend to buy a 1-bedroom condo. Within a couple of years, they're moving up to a 2-bedroom, and then maybe on to a townhouse or a house. But the final step of moving into a house is usually a much longer term. People stay in houses, 20, 30 years before they move into something else. All right, so it's not all roses when it comes to owning a house in Vancouver. There are some cons. And the biggest one, I'm sure, is not going to be a big surprise, but it's the cost. It's affordability. Owning a house is a very expensive endeavor in the city of Vancouver. And just to give you a rough idea, it is May of 2023, and prices, a typical house on the west side of Vancouver is $3.3 million. Typical house in North Vancouver is $2.2 million. In East Vancouver is $1.8 million. In Surrey, it's $1.5 million. And in Port Coquitlam, it's $1.4 million. So even in the distant suburbs of the city of Vancouver, you still need over $1 million to be able to buy just an average house. None of these numbers were for anything special. Those are just typical houses in those neighborhoods. Affordability is very difficult, and many people face that challenge. Of course, with, as I mentioned, basement suite, it does make things a little more affordable and makes that more manageable. Number two, it would be just responsibility. Owning a house isn't for everyone. You have to be aware that when you own a house, there's work to be done. You got to mow the lawn. You got to take care of the house. You got to clear and shovel the snow. There's things to do all the time. Take care of your garden. Of course, all of that can be hired out, as it would be if you owned in a condo, but somebody else is worrying about that when you own in a condo. So I find many young people these days actually kind of don't want to bother with that stuff. They value time spent on other things more, and so they're willing to pay a bit of a premium in regard to maintenance fees with a condominium so that somebody else worries about all that stuff. But when you own a house, that headache is your own. Number 3, in terms of drawbacks, cons when owning a house, would be their location. They're not in the most central location. What's being built in the highest density, most central locations, busiest intersections, closest to transit, are condos. And then just behind those are townhouses and duplexes. So most of the houses in the city of Vancouver are a little bit outside of the main centers. So you're typically going to find they're not the most walkable neighborhoods. Now, there are exceptions, but just as a vast generalization, they're not quite as central, not as walkable. And then finally, another big one I think that a lot of young people feel is that owning a house isn't really sexy anymore. So if you're spending a similar amount of money, let's say you have $1.5 million, you could buy a house in Port Coquitlam that's going to be 30, 40 years old and probably needs to be renovated. It's not going to be in great shape. And there's a lot of responsibility, as I mentioned, that comes along with it. But if you spend $1.5 million and it's a condo, probably going to be much more central in the city of Vancouver, kind of a cooler neighborhood, a hipper neighborhood. But most importantly, the fit and finishing of that condo is going to be at a much higher grade, a much higher level. It might be 5 years old, maybe 10 years old, but it's going to have granite or quartz countertops. It's going to have some stainless steel appliances. Like people can just move in and not have to worry about anything. And that's the thing that a lot of people are sort of drawn to these days. They don't really love the idea of something that's a little bit, you're getting the land, it's a good investment, but it's not as appealing in its finish. Real quick, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up if you get any kind of value out of this whatsoever. It'd really help me out. I'm also putting out videos like this about living in Vancouver every single week. So if you want to see more of me, just hit that subscribe button and you won't miss a single video. A video like this one about buying a house in Vancouver. Let's get back to it. All right, so now you've decided that buying a house is for you. Here's some advice on things to look out for when you're purchasing. Number 1, I think if you're looking at this as an investment, you want to have an eye on future development potential. And we just have so much demand in the city of Vancouver, so few single family residential homes, and everything is built out. The city is so small. So the only place that the demand can be satisfied, higher density is being built on single family residential. That's something that's been happening really has sped up in the last 20 years or so, and it increases when the market is really hot. So it's been a little quiet the last couple of years, but as the market picks up again, there's going to be that push again from developers to swallow up single family residential land and for the city to rezone it so that higher density can be placed on it. And so there's opportunities to find that, whether it's in the city of Vancouver or in some of the suburbs. And that is where you're going to want to talk to a real estate professional that knows the area and can help guide you. Number 2 is inspections. With a house, I would say it's probably the most important thing when you're making an offer on a home to have an inspection, to do some due diligence. You're buying, as I said, these aren't typically brand new properties. They're 30, 40, 50 years old. You want to understand what you're buying, and you want to hire somebody that's a third party at arm's length, has no interest in the purchase, that can give you some advice and some input on, the condition, on how to maintain the home, things to look out for over time. Number 3, oil tanks and asbestos. I'm not going to get into these details too much, but these are, every market I find has their concerns about certain types of property. In Regina, as an example, I know that there's clay and that there's issues with the foundations of houses. That's not something that we face in Vancouver, or wood bugs in some other parts of the country. That's again not something that we're concerned about. What you do want to worry about are oil tanks and asbestos. Now, oil tanks are a way that we used to heat our houses with oil, and when that was converted to natural gas, those oil tanks remained, they were decommissioned, but left in the soil, usually with older houses. And so you need to be worried about getting those out, and you don't want to buy a house that has an oil tank. You want to make sure that the property does not have one. This is something that's become a bigger and bigger issue over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, it wasn't really something we thought about, and is an enormous issue that everybody thinks about today. Similarly, asbestos, all of our houses typically had some asbestos somewhere in it. If it's 30 years old, you can be pretty much guaranteed it's somewhere in the house. But now when you do a renovation, it needs to be removed from the house from the debris of the house if you take it out. And again, this is one of those things that didn't used to be an issue, but has become a bigger one. And I can see this becoming bigger and bigger in the future. And number 4 is just to remember that all the value is in the land. The house really is a byproduct, unless it's brand new. But really, if it's a 20, 30, 40-year-old house, the house has, is 10% of the value that you're paying for it. So really think about where this property is, the location of it, the size of the property, and then is there anything odd about it, about the shape, about is it on a T-junction? Is it at a busy intersection? Is it quiet? Is it next to a park? Is it close to transit, schools, that type of thing? So the value that you need to be concerned about most of all is the land value. And really quick, I just wanted to touch on sort of the future. There's things that, we may not be fully thinking about now, but become more clear as time wears on. And I think one of the things that, we all need to be aware of, and is very clear to me, is that the city of Vancouver is very small. We only have 75,000 houses in the city of Vancouver. All of the supply for the increasing demand that we have is coming from single family residential, from this already very limited supply. And so being able to afford a house now is a luxury, but I believe it's only going to become more of a luxury in the future. They're going to become incredibly expensive. And the city and the province are just recently have been pushing more and more to get some of that supply from single family residential and push it out into higher density. And so one of the changes that's just been happening in the last few months is that the city is proposing converting all single family residential, which has already been allowed to essentially be rezoned to duplex zoning, but they're proposing to move that to 4plexes and 6plexes. So not too far in the future. This isn't guaranteed. It hasn't been voted on yet, but it's a proposal at the city. It's just an example of where, we're headed. There's going to be a point, most likely, I believe, in the future where there's no single family residential in the city of Vancouver, or only in some of the most exclusive neighborhoods. And they will be worth an astronomical amount of money. It is already a lot of money that is needed to buy a house in the city of Vancouver. But, I really strongly believe that's only going to continue. And last thing, just some tips when it comes to buying a house. They are expensive, as I've mentioned, but there are ways that people are making them more affordable. And number 1 is really having parts of the house that you rent out, whether that's Airbnb-ing it when you go away for the weekend, or renting out your basement suite, for $3,000 a month. That's an enormous sum of money that can go towards your mortgage every month. And it's not as common in many other much more affordable parts of Canada, but it is very much the norm in the city of Vancouver and many of its suburbs. And then there's also the option of a laneway house. And a laneway house is a separate building built where a garage would normally be built, but it's a home. It's a structure that can house people and can be rented out. They can't be sold, but it's also another way that people are making housing more affordable in the city of Vancouver and being able to afford to live here. Another option is that people are often choosing to live together longer. So families, larger families are buying homes together. Kids are buying homes with their parents so they can be close, they can help out with kids. And then also friends. Friend groups are starting to buy homes more commonly, or siblings are buying homes together, siblings, families, and that type of thing. So there's more creative ways that people are finding to try and make owning a house in the city of Vancouver more affordable. And then lastly, if you're finding that a house is really out of reach, there are some options that are house-like and are becoming more and more common. And that would be a half duplex, which is a single family residential house split into 2, either front and back or top and bottom. And the other option would be a townhouse. And a townhouse is typically, multiple units built on one piece of land, a stratified piece of land. And the units are usually 3 stories tall, roughly around 1,200 square feet, usually 3 bedrooms, and they'll have anywhere from 4 doors up till, could be 100. But the sky's the limit. But they're generally smaller developments. Maintenance fees are not as high typically as you'll find with a condo, but they're really good alternatives to owning a house. So if buying a house isn't going to be for you, be sure to check out my other video here. That's all about buying a condo in the city of Vancouver. And then this one over here is also about the best family neighborhoods in the city. Those are videos you're definitely going to want to check out. But I really appreciate you watching this video, watching it all the way to the end. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you got any kind of value. Subscribe if you want to see more of me. And if you're thinking of moving to Vancouver, be sure to reach out. I've helped hundreds of people just like you move to the city of Vancouver over my 15-year career. Contact information is right there on the screen. So thank you again for watching, and we'll see you on the next video next week.